All right, let's do this thing. Welcome to the first episode of the SpringBlake College Football Show with SpringBlake. If you guys are listening on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts, first of all, thank you for doing so. I appreciate the support. Please make sure while you're there to leave a like, to leave a 5-star review, to maybe even subscribe and support this show. If you are watching on YouTube, first off, how sick's the setup? We got a JMU football helmet, go Dukes. We've got this Post Malone, Stoney, White Iverson, Wilson basketball, which has nothing to do with college football, but it's the coolest piece of memorabilia I own, so I want to show it off to you all. Behind me, we've got a Busch beer sign, shout out Busch Light, and behind me on this other side, we've got a SpringBlake sign, so you never forget who you're watching. Just like I said, for those listening, if you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, share with friends. I promise any of the support that you give me on this show, I will give you tenfold in content. It is my biggest wish to make this thing a success, a hit, and I cannot do that without your help. Also, make sure, if you are someone that uses social media, to head over to Twitter, to head over to TikTok, to Instagram. The handle is the same everywhere, at SpringBlake CFB. SpringBlake College Football. That is all this show is going to be. I am obsessed with the sport. It is a newfound love. I am addicted. So it's going to be everything from league-wide topics to betting on the Sunday slates, big story pictures, conference stuff, players, whatever you want around the world of college football during the season, thrice a week. In the off season, it's probably going to be a lot of NFL draft stuff as we kind of connect the bridge between what we saw in the college football season to the NFL draft. It's that really is where my love for college football originated, was evaluating the NFL draft. And then about a season or two ago, I fully dove into the sport itself, and man, I think it's the best sport that this world has right now. So that's the socials again, SpringBlake CFB. Please support the show on social media. Support it on these channels, these platforms, wherever you're listening or watching. I really appreciate it. Now, the other thing I want to talk about before we get into the topics for today, this show better work. I've done a few shows, and I want to be perfectly honest. You know, I went to college to pursue sports journalism. I graduated. I didn't really have the offers that excited me to go and pursue it as a career, so I picked the lovely city of Nashville to move to, took a sales job. I now run and own and operate a business in Nashville. I'm not necessarily doing what I love in my professional world. I would love for one day to be able to re-enter this industry, to re-enter covering sports, specifically football, and make that my career. So this is me kind of just trying to bridge that gap. You know, there's about 6 years on my resume where I haven't been doing anything on this professionally, and I'd love to slowly integrate. So this show, I really want to work for a lot of reasons. Also because I think it's the last one I'm going to give a try. You know, if I'm perfectly honest with myself, I've done different podcasts before. I've done stuff that covers the NFL, that covers the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA, team-specific content, NFL draft-specific content. I've tried a lot of things, and for one reason or another, mostly being my own fault of not really following through on the projects, they haven't really gone anywhere. And so this one, I say this one, I have in my doc here, this one better work because it's the last one I'm going to try. If this show does not bridge me to the eventual career that I'm looking for, I'm going to hang it up. I'm going to go back to this world of sales, to, you know, other business endeavors, and just enjoy sports as a hobby and stop trying to do this stuff because I'm getting old and it's probably a little weird to come out with podcasts every year or two. So that's the only other thing I wanted to say about this show itself and why it is so important to me. You really are going to get my best effort, my last ditch effort, because I want this to be how I spend the rest of my professional life. So thank you for the support. let's go into what this show is going to be today specifically. I want to just talk a little bit about myself. If you have found me, through my videos on TikTok, or if you're someone that has stumbled across me for my writing work with Texas A&M football, I want this part of the show to just be like, this is SpringBlake. This is who he is. This is how he grew up. This is his introduction to college football. All his little quick beliefs on the sport and what's great with it, what needs improvement on it, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. So a little bit of time here, rapid thoughts about me, and some general college football thoughts, and then we're going to dive into the 3 biggest storylines that are going to shape the 2025 college football season. So before we get to that, I'm going to take a drink of water. We are doing this live, no breaks. I've got an iPad filming. I've got something over here. I don't even know what it is recording my audio. If you hear the drinking, sorry. The show must go on. So, a little bit about me. My name is Blake Pace. I grew up in upstate New York, and because of that, I really grew up a teamless college football fan. My family had professional football teams that they rooted for. My dad was a Giants fan. We're diehard Yankees fans. I adopted the Knicks when Carmelo Anthony got traded there. In the world of college athletics, in upstate New York, you just have Syracuse University. And Syracuse is great, really fun, basketball program growing up in. But in the world of football, it was, hey, here's one really good year and 7 really bad ones. And then, hey, a new head coach did great in his first year, and then he fell apart. It was hard to latch on to college football as a kid growing up because there just wasn't that conference that made it feel special. I live down here in Nashville now. You're in an SEC town. It's Vandy, but you're in SEC country. You've got the likes of Tennessee football fans and Alabama fans that live here. You can feel college football in this environment. In upstate New York, where it's Syracuse and you've got Buffalo and the MAC, it doesn't really feel like college football lives up there. So I grew up without college football. Then I attended the great University of James Madison. Go Dukes. At the time, they were still an FCS program, a really good one. 2-time national champion myself. Got to cover the football team for a couple years there as a member of the Breeze, JMU's student-run publication. And now I live in a town that holds Vanderbilt. So as you can see, picking up the dots, Syracuse, JMU, Vandy, it's hard to really latch on to something that feels meaningful in the world of college football. I will always root for JMU. We're in the Sun Belt. I understand that in the world of college football today, G5 teams don't really do too much outside of maybe that last final playoff berth. Still want them to win, still root for them every week, but it's not like I have an SEC team, or I have a Big Ten team. Syracuse, sure, I want them to do good as well too, but even if you're a middle-of-the-pack ACC team, you're probably one of the worst teams in the Big Ten or the SEC. So because of that, I think the biggest point I want with this show is that I don't want to hear any bias talk. I don't want to hear, SEC bias. He just talks about the SEC every episode. Or, he's Big Ten bias because he says that Ohio State and Michigan won the last 2 national champions and thinks Penn State is going to do it again this year, which, might be true. We'll find out. I won't predict that until a few more weeks, but I don't want to hear any bias talk because I am just a lover of the sport and the sport itself. I do not have this backup of growing up a Bama fan or growing up, in the world of Big Ten football. I am just a fan of the sport. Now, because of that, I do gravitate toward coaches more than anything. Gravitating toward players in college is tough because you maybe get them for a couple years and then they're gone as well too. So I gravitate more to coaches that I really love. I do hope to find my team through doing this show, and maybe there's just a coach that really clings on to me, and I feel so impassioned to adopt a big-time football program as my own. I'm not there yet. I do some writing for Texas A&M football. That's where you can find a lot of my work at the Gig'em Gazette. I probably should have said that earlier, but I'm saying it now. So if you want to find any of my writing, you can head over there. It's a fan-sided page. We'll be doing Texas A&M football all season. But because of that, I kind of, like I said, lean toward coaches. So let me just get a few of my coaches out there first so you know where I lean. Team-wise, I might have a soft spot for. Dan Lanning, favorite coach in the sport. Big year coming up for him at Oregon. Replacing Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, now Dante Moore in there. Not a lot of chatter with Oregon. We'll talk about them in the next coming weeks, but it feels pretty quiet up in Eugene, despite them being one of the best teams in the sport. I'm a big Kalen DeBoer guy. We'll talk about Kalen DeBoer on Wednesday's episode. Really like Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, he's been one of the most successful coaches at every step he's ever taken. I'm a big Hoss guy. If you're a big, meaty football coach and your team takes on that identity, you have all my appreciation, love, and respect in the world. So the two guys that stand out the most for that, Mike Elko, Brett Bielema, just two absolute units. And I think that their football teams always take form of that Hoss mentality. And then Curt Cignetti, go Dukes. I was heartbroken when he left for Indiana. And I was mad for like 5 weeks when Indiana was still in the show. That man talks his talk, and he's a damn good football coach. And I respect the success he brought to JMU. I wish he would have kept it, because it's hard to think that JMU wouldn't have been in the college football playoffs last year if we had had that coaching staff and all of Indiana's best players, some of which we'll talk about today, that went to JMU. But he talks his shit. He doesn't care. He's like this old curmudgeon. Yeah, you could get on him for the way that things went against both Ohio State. Was it Ohio State? Why can't I remember where they ended up losing and getting... It was Notre Dame definitely in the playoffs. There was one other game. Either way, big Curt Cignetti guy, just because he brought me a lot of happiness at JMU. And that's really about it on the coaches. Now, players I do get really excited for. And we'll talk about these guys later, but like DJ Lagway, he's a little banged up right now. Hopefully he can stay healthy for this upcoming season. I am a massive DJ Lagway guy. I'm a firm believer that he is going to be one of the bright future players in this sport over the next couple of years, as long as he can stay healthy. But that's kind of where I lean program-wise, and not even so program. I like to see these coaches do well, because I think they are the best at what they do. And again, I haven't spent this much time talking in a while, so we're going to have the frequent water breaks. I'll try to make it as minimal as possible, but I do want to have a voice to do episode 2. So moving along, more things about me. I've talked about how college football is kind of a newfound love to me. I will not pretend to know the long, great history of this sport. I will also not pretend to know even the somewhat recent history of this sport. I am a sports fan, so for the last 10, 15 years of my life, I know the big storylines in college football. I watch the big games, I watch the championship, the playoffs. I have a general understanding of what has happened in this sport. That being said, I'm learning new things about this sport every day, where coaches had been in previous stops. The background of certain players transferring from place to place, like the connection between certain coaches and players and program rivalries. I'm learning all that stuff on the go. So there will be stuff I say on the show that you're probably listening to and you're like, the fuck is this guy talking about? I will never pretend, and I'll always admit, like, hey, didn't know that. So be patient with me there. I am trying to learn as much about the sport as I can, but it's 134, 136 teams, and I've only been watching like every game possible for the last couple of years. So be patient with me there. I want the sport to be informative, insightful. I also want it to be a little bit silly. I think there's a lot of people out there that take themselves so seriously in this space. And I think the success of a lot of guys recently have been those that are maybe authentic to themselves. I'm a weird guy. I love sports. I love music. I'm one of those weird EDM heads. I go to raves. I do a lot of weird shit in my own personal life. I'm goofy. I'm not going to pretend to just be this football hardo that lives, eats, breathes the sport. I love it. I also love other things in life. So I want my authentic self in this show. I don't want it to just be like I turn on this camera and all of a sudden I'm up here in a suit and tie. That being said, suit and tie, I just have one rule for this show. One rule. And we'll keep it until the end of time. The hat stays on and the sleeves stay off. Pretty simple to explain why. I sweat. I'm already sweating right now. I can feel the bottom of these shirts already a little sweaty. We'd have some really bad pit stains while doing the show on YouTube. And the hat. You know, I got some nice curls. I got some long hair. I wouldn't say it necessarily matches at the top. I got a pretty big forehead. It might be thinning. I don't know. I'm 28. A lot of guys' hair thins by the age of 28. So only rule for this show. You will always see a hat on this head, unless we want to do like a GoFundMe, or you can donate, maybe a super chat for me to go get hair plugs, head over to Turkey. And the sleeves will always be off this shirt because I don't want to be watching back on some clips and doing editing and have to stare at these gross pit stains that I know I have typically when I'm wearing shirts with sleeves. So that's the one rule. Couple more things before we get into the other storylines, the big college football part of the show. I will try to discuss everything about the world of college football, but at the same time, I'm also going to gravitate toward the teams and the conferences that are most important. Shout out to the guys that do a podcast on the G5 teams. Shout out to the ones that are a Georgia Tech podcast. Those are great podcasts and very special. For someone like myself, as you can tell, I grew up at Syracuse, JMU. I live in a city with Vanderbilt. I gravitate toward what matters in the sport, and that sounds really rude to say, but if I'm trying to attract an audience that loves college football and the sport as a whole, they're not going to want an episode where I go over the top G5 contenders in the sport, which we could do, but I want to focus on where the sport is heading, what the sport gravitates to. It's going to be a lot of SEC and Big Ten, and probably more Big 12 than ACC. College football is really heading in this direction where a few conferences matter more than the others. And it does suck for the purity of the sport, but I'm not going to come up here and break down every ACC matchup heading into a Saturday when I know that people want to know what my thoughts are on Ohio State, Texas, or, Georgia, Alabama. I'm going to focus on the stuff that gets the most eyeballs because I also think it's the most captivating part of this sport. Another thing about this show, I will not, how do I want to say it, fight the good fight when it comes to playoff structure, NIL, transfer portal. There are a lot of great big names in the sport, in media for the sport. Josh Pate, Joel Klatt, Danny Cannell, even though he annoys me, Ryan Russillo. A lot of these guys do a lot of work arguing about what's ruining college football. Expanded playoffs are a mess. NIL is a mess. Transfer portal is a mess. I think all of it is a mess. This is episode 1. I don't have any subscribers to these channels. I don't really have a huge following here. So I'm not going to fight any good fight on this show that is then going to turn a lot of heads being like, who had that really great rant about the playoff structure? SpringBlake. And then anybody that person says that to, they go, who's SpringBlake? And they'll go, oh, it's this guy I found on TikTok. I'm not going to do those things. So we'll talk about new stuff when it happens, but I'm not going to sit here in my rocking chair telling all the things that I think need to be fixed about college football. That being said, I have thoughts and opinions, and I'll just get them out here first because I think it's important to at least know where I stand on certain things. So obviously, I'm a fan of paying players. I think it needs more structure, obviously. I I've always been confused why we don't treat players and NIL and contracts like we do with coaches. Like, why can't we have bonuses or payout structures for achieving a certain number of metrics or team wins or, your attendance at workouts? Like, it should be almost reward-based compensation for these players, just as it is for head coaches. Like, you have your base salary, but if you want to make on top of that, maybe it's an all SEC honors. Or maybe it's, the team gets to the playoffs and you can get that tiered bonus. I think doing so and having contracts and having multi-year agreements will help the universities a lot too, because of, maybe like trying, to avoid losing 40 players in off season to the transfer portal because they've signed multi-year deals. So now they have to stay at least 2, or they have to give some of that money back if they do choose to leave, or the other team has to buy out the first team's contract so they can sign a contract with him. I think it's the Wild West. Everybody knows it. I'm surprised I don't hear enough conversations about doing it like that and treating them like coaches. Like Curt Cignetti is a great example. Curt Cignetti, when he left JMU, he had to be bought out of his contract. So what did Indiana do? They bought him out of his JMU contract. If next offseason Arch Manning wants to go to Ohio State should have to pay Texas for his talents. Or there should at least be some easier outs or some compensation back, a way to put more responsibility on the players and also provide more security for the teams themselves. So that's my thoughts on NIL and transfer portal. Real quick on playoff expansion. I am always of the opinion and the interest of creating the highest amount of meaningful games. Right now, we're in talks of moving up to 14, 16 teams. Look, the NCAA is always going to be focused on what makes the most money, the most games. So we're going to go to 16 at some point. The structure of that is so important. Recently I think we've seen the SEC and the Big 12 and maybe a little bit of the ACC come out in support of the 5-11 model, which is you get your 4 Power 4 champions, the best G5, and 11 at-large bids. As opposed to what the Big 10 proposes, and I think there is some backing in some places with these smaller conferences as well too, of the 4-4-2-2-1-3, which is 4 SEC, 4 Big 10, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12, 1 G5, 3 at large. I lean more with that one because I think it creates the most amount of meaningful games. I think the 5-11 model is scary because I just don't want the committee, the playoff committee that being, having more say on who gets in and who gets out. You're going to leave 11 spots up to the playoff committee. We yelled all last season and they only had 7 to pick? Was it? We had a 12-team playoff and there was 5 automatic bids? Yeah. We got mad about 7. Now you want to give them 4 more to dispute? And then you're going to get into the range of debating who the best 16th team in the nation is? 16 through 25. You could have 13 teams deserving of that spot. I don't want the committee having a strong grip on the overwhelming majority of teams that get into the playoffs. I lean the 4-4-5-1-2, or the 4-4-2-2-1-3, but I also have my own idea. And I said this on a social clip once. I would like the 4-4-5-1-2 model. And what that is that the Big 10 and the SEC get their 4 teams. There's 5 teams split up between the Big 12 and the ACC. Now, what you get out of that is you get the 2 teams that make the conference title in each conference. So the 2 teams playing for the ACC and Big 12 championship, they're in the playoffs. That 5th spot, you get the 3rd place ACC and the 3rd place Big 12 team. They play each other conference championship weekend, and the winner takes that 5th spot and gets into the playoffs. I think it creates another really meaningful game in that part of the season. You get your 1 G5 and then 2 at-large bids. One can be Notre Dame and one could be one of those other, maybe it's a 5th SEC team or a 5th Big Ten team or whoever it ends up being. Either way, that creates the most meaningful amount of games. The 5-11 is so risky because I get why the SEC is into it, because if they get one guaranteed in, their conference champion, there's going to be an argument that they deserve to get the most amount of teams in their conference, which is why I don't understand the ACC and the Big 12 supporting it, because they don't have the depth or the quality even at the top to combat with the 5th place team in the SEC. So again, we're not really going to discuss these things in the show that much. I just thought for the first episode here to give you guys a good understanding of what we're going to be, what this show is going to look like. That's me, my background in football, my overarching thoughts on the sport, and now we can get into the fun stuff. Before we get into the 3 biggest storylines that will shape the upcoming college football season, I want to give 2 quick shout-outs. The first being to DaniKay Designs. If you are on Spotify or Apple, you'll see a very nice, beautifully made logo as the cover art for this show. If you are on the YouTube channel, you will see a little bottom bar with the logo and some other work that she's done for us. Big thanks to DaniKay Designs. You can find their social media at DaniKay.designs. That's on Instagram. She does fantastic work. If you are ever in need of any graphic design or illustrations, please go to DaniKay. She did a fantastic job with this show and is a very talented person. Second thanks. We are proudly supported by the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville. As you can see, my branded water bottle on the YouTube channel. The Spice and Tea Exchange. We are supported by their Nashville location. Why? Because I own it. Because if I say they sponsor, I don't know, we can get away with some things on that. Spice and Tea Exchange. We are in the middle of summer. If you're unfamiliar with the Spice and Tea Exchange, I should start there. We've got a wall of loose leaf teas. We've got spice blends for cooking, infused salt, infused sugars, candles, kitchen accessories, tea accessories. You name it, we've got it. Our location in store as well too has its own tea bar. We are in the midst of one of the hottest summers here in Nashville that I can remember. Summer's going strong. You need to beat the heat. We've got great iced teas that you can make at home or in store. If you're a griller, we've got a ton of great steak rubs, barbecue rubs, stuff for seafood as well too that you can use on the grill. If you head in person or submit an order online with the Nashville location, that'll be spiceandtea.com/Nashville. You get 20% off your first order with the code SBCFB, SpringBlake College Football. That's the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville. And we thank the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville for proudly supporting this show. So we are heading for an awesome college football season. For the first time in what feels like, 8-10 years, maybe more so, because like I said, my history doesn't go back that far. This feels like the most wide open year in terms of who can win the sport. There isn't a sitting Georgia or a Michigan or an Ohio State or an Alabama. There are teams at the top, but that there isn't one singular like, oh, well, if you're going to win the national championship, you have to go through X. It's very wide open. There's a ton of great teams, ton of great players, ton of great coaches. It really does feel like this year is going to be special in terms of chaos, excitement, and just never knowing what's going to happen on a week in, week out basis. So there's a ton of things that are going to shape this college football season. Today, I've got 3 that have my eye a little more than anything else. The first being, which capable star quarterback is ready to take his title contending team to the promised land? Ton of great quarterbacks in the sport, and I'm more so looking at 3 specifically. that are not just headed for really great seasons this year, but also the NFL draft next season. Those three are Cade Klubnik of Clemson, Drew Aller of Penn State, and Garrett Nussmeier of LSU. So let's dive into each one. Cade Klubnik, hyper-productive quarterback, really great team at Clemson, finally has some emerging dudes at the wide receiver position. Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, they're really stepping into their own, where the last few years it did feel like Klubnik had to do a lot of work on his own. Continuity on the offensive line, they returned 4 starters, the defense is fantastic. Cade is super capable of leading Clemson to a national championship. That being said, his numbers in his career against better opponents, let's just say the SEC and Notre Dame, are a little bit underwhelming. It's just 8 games, not a huge variety, but he's 3-5, 60% completion percentage, which is relatively close to his career, 63. 4 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And that's against, South Carolina a couple times, Notre Dame a few times, Georgia last year. Cade Klubnik is a really great quarterback. But I am really excited to see this season how he fares against those top-tier opponents. He gets LSU in week 1. We'll talk about Garrett Nussmeier shortly here. Might be one of the biggest games of the season, and it's one of the first games that we get to watch. How does he perform against LSU? Does he do better than he did against Georgia's defense in 2024? How do those receivers step up and make themselves more readily available for Cade and more trustworthy for Cade? This team is in a really unique position where I think, it's not too often we're going to be saying an ACC team is one of the favorites to win it all. But they've got a really special team. He's an incredible talent, and I'm looking forward to seeing if he's the one of these 3 that is able to get Clemson back into the national championship conversation. Now, Garrett Nussmeier, just like Cade Klubnik, has all the physical tools, arm talent to elevate a team to national championship contention. But unlike Clemson, I do have my concerns at LSU with what's around him. And now LSU is projected to be a national championship semi-favorite. I believe they're in that top 5 to 6 range. I can even check right now because I've got FanDuel pulled up. Oh, they're a little bit lower, actually. They're a lot lower than I thought. They're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they're top 10 in terms of teams projected to win it all. But I'm worried about what is around him this season. Last year, it wasn't great. 12 interception season. The offensive line was shaky despite having 3 NFL draft picks. They couldn't run the ball to save their lives. And honestly, play calling wise, it felt like they just refused to run the ball sometimes. Wide receiver talent is okay. They return just 1 starter on the line, 1 wide receiver. They have I believe a true sophomore, a redshirt sophomore running back that I think is a talented player. I just don't know if it all fits together to be this high-octane offense that we'll see from teams like, potentially Texas or potentially Oklahoma or a Penn State or an Oregon with Will Stein. I just have my concerns if Cade Klubnik has these receivers around him and a strong offensive line and a true freshman running back that seems to be the real deal, does Garrett Nussmeier have enough of those tools to be at the same level as Cade Klubnik? Or does he have to do too much and throws another 10-plus interceptions this season? I think he probably has the most talent of any of these throwers. I just don't know if coming back in to this year they've done enough. I've heard a lot. We'll talk about LSU again in just a little bit with one of my other top storylines from the season. I hear every reason why LSU should be better, but I also have a lot of questions as to why it should be about the same as what we saw last year. So that's my thought on Garrett Nussmeier and his ability to bring LSU to a national championship. And then to finish things off, Drew Aller. I think Drew Aller gets such a bad rap. And that's not to say that he's perfect. He makes his mistakes. He had a couple throws against Notre Dame that you just can't make as a quarterback in big games. And yes, he hasn't beaten Ohio State. He hasn't beaten Michigan in his career. He's been let down by some really bad receiver play at Penn State. And when I think of the teams that he struggled against these last few years, the three that I just mentioned, you know what they all have in common? They produce some of the best secondaries in the nation these last few years. Michigan, DBU the last couple of years. Ohio State always has great corners. Notre Dame, last year, this year, still one of the best secondaries in all of football. So when you have a great secondary and you don't have great talent at wide receiver, tell me which great Penn State receiver has gone through there the last few years. I can understand why a quarterback doesn't look his absolute best when he's having to rely on his running backs and tight end all the time. I'm a big Drew Aller guy. Physically gifted, arm talent out the ass. Year 2 with Andy Kotelnicki, I have huge expectations, and they added in some awesome wide receivers this year. Kyron Hudson out of USC, Trevor Pena from Syracuse, Devontae Ross from Troy. Those are 3 dudes that I would say can be more productive than any of the receivers they've had the last 2 seasons. Drew Aller has never had a receiver go over 720 yards in a season. These 3 guys last year combined for nearly 2,500 yards. Do the math. That's about 750 each, if not more. He's a 6,000-yard thrower in his career, 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and this is his 3rd year starting, and as I said, 2nd year with Andy Kotelnicki. Everything is pushing toward Drew Aller having a fantastic season. If I had to place my bet on one of these 3 guys, Aller, Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, I'm most confident in Drew Aller's abilities this year with this Penn State team to get to a national championship and potentially win the whole thing. Another water break. Spice and Tea Exchange. Go there. So that is storyline number 1. Storyline number 2 is just as intriguing to me. And probably that's because I gravitate toward coaches more than anything in this sport. Which hot seat coaches shit and which ones get off the pot? I've got 4 guys here that I want to discuss with you. The first being Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley was one of those guys when I first really started getting into college football. I was like, oh my God, he's just at another level. He is years above what these other offensive coordinators in the sport are doing. Has that ended? Has everybody caught up to Lincoln Riley? You know, he needs to have a big year for the Trojans this season. And not just because his teams have gotten worse every season since joining USC. And by the way, if you go back to Oklahoma, each season they got worse as well too. It's not just important to reverse that trend and to actually improve after a season. There were some talented players on this USC roster that left for one reason or another and have awesome opportunities lined up for them this season. Miller Moss, last year starting quarterback for most of the season. Now they're with Jordan Maeva. Probably said that last name wrong. I apologize to him. He was benched toward the end of the season, Miller Moss was, and is now the starting quarterback for Louisville. One thing I know about Louisville football is that Jeff Brom gets shit done with quarterbacks. And I think Miller Moss is a really talented thrower of the football. So if Miller Moss goes to Louisville, and Louisville is one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the ACC, yeah, I know it's not the Big Ten, but if USC is getting struggles out of its quarterback play, and this dude's over in the ACC lighting it up, that's a bad look on Lincoln Riley. Your players should be better when they're with you. Another guy, the Branch brothers in general, but Zachariah I want to talk about specifically. Super talented wide receiver, left USC, now is in Georgia, might be the best receiver on the Bulldogs this season. If Georgia all of a sudden resurrects this passing game they didn't have last year, and he's one of the better receivers in the SEC, and your receivers aren't doing too much, that's a bad look. You can't have guys leave you when you're this offensive guru and have them perform better without you as their coach. This year needs to see a leap from USC. There's no Ohio State or Penn State on the schedule. You do host Michigan, thankfully, but you also have to travel to face Oregon and Notre Dame, 2 incredibly tough road games, and what I would say 2 teams that are certainly better than USC. Michigan could be a toss-up depending what they get from their quarterback position. They've got 3 make-or-break games on this schedule. Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. If Lincoln Riley is struggling to beat the second or even maybe third tier teams of the Big Ten, all hope is lost for me with Lincoln and USC. And it speaks to the league catching up to him, to players doing better outside of his scheme. And that's where I think you can start to get that really hot seat that either, he's beating those teams and can steal a win against Michigan or Oregon and Notre Dame, and you're like, okay, Lincoln Riley is back. Or he loses to Oregon and Notre Dame, maybe loses to Michigan, and loses to one of Illinois, Iowa, or Nebraska. That's when things start to get a little bit tricky for me with the relationship between Riley and USC. Hugh Freeze is a funny character in the world of college sports. He makes me chuckle sometimes. Is he a slightly troubled man? Possibly. But it kind of like Lincoln Riley, it was this other offensive guru that really has yet to hit his stride at his current big-time destination. 2 losing seasons with the Tigers, 5-11 record in the SEC, really bad fourth quarter collapses, second half collapses in conference as well too. They're hot and cold and colder, and then maybe a little bit hot and cold. It just hasn't been going the way Auburn probably intended it to. Now, for a while, he was hanging on to the fact that he was doing great in recruiting and great in the transfer portal to kind of elevate the reason why you would keep a Hugh Freeze on. Oh, let those guys get in, let things change, things will get better. Well, that's dipped now after some of his top 2026 recruits have backed out of their commitments. Now, keep in mind, with Auburn and Hugh Freeze, Auburn has never had a head coach survive 3 consecutive losing seasons. And the way that Auburn's schedule has lined up this year really doesn't make me feel good for Hugh Freeze. So SEC play starts off with Oklahoma and A&M on the road, followed by hosting Georgia and Mizzou. That's your first month. It does lighten up at the end, but it's really tough sledding for Freeze if he starts SEC play 1-3. Maybe he gets that win over Oklahoma. But there's a chance he goes 0-4 if Oklahoma's legit. I think really highly of Mizzou. A&M and Georgia are definitely better than Auburn right now. So if Freeze starts 1-3 or 0-4 in conference play, you still have Vandy to play, and Diego Pavia is 3-0 against Hugh Freeze, and you also have Alabama at the end of the season. So there's a chance that you've already got 5 losses in that conference just by teams that are definitely better than you or just toss-up games. And then here's the more depressing part. Auburn isn't even favored to win their season opener against Baylor. They're not a massive dog, and they are on the road. But say they lose to Baylor, and then they struggle, as I just said, in the SEC. They could be 3-4 or 2-5 with 5 games to go. And momentum could be ruined. It might not matter how much you beat Vandy or Kentucky by at the end of the year. If you start 2-5, the job may be done. You might be out the door already at that point. You might not have the chance to coach the rest of the season. Baylor, Auburn, week 1, Friday Night Lights, so important for the Hugh Freeze era at this university. If he loses, I have a tough time thinking that he makes it to November. Let's move along to another guy in the SEC, another slightly troubled guy, and another guy that probably has a lot of his life riding on week 1, Brian Kelly at LSU. With Brian Kelly, I think what's hurting him the most right now is that it's never a good look when you leave for greener pastures, and the pastures you left start looking more green than they were when you were there. Now, I'll admit, Notre Dame has been able to take advantage of this new era of paying players and getting your entire TV rights deal to really enhance things at that university. But that being said, if you leave a place because you're not able to keep winning there or to compete for national championships, and then that team is in the national championship just a couple years later, it doesn't look good when you haven't done that yet at your new destination. Now, Kelly, what he does have going for him, he's done well at LSU. 29-11 record in 3 seasons. Yeah, he hasn't brought him to the postseason, but he's done good enough. But I think that's what's tough for LSU is that good enough really isn't going to cut it when you also don't feel like an authentic representation of the university. Like Ed Ogeron, if he was 29-11, that's an LSU guy. He's very beloved. Of course, he has the national championship. But Brian Kelly from the start just felt like this really awkward fit. And if you're an awkward fit, it's fine if you're winning national championships. You know, like Dabo Swinney is a weird personality. You know what he does? He wins. And he's a national championship winning coach. Brian Kelly is clunky, and he also hasn't really found that next level at LSU. I said it before when talking about Garrett Nussmeier. There's so much chatter as to why LSU is for sure heading to the playoffs, deep playoff run, SEC title mix. Fine. I just think there's a lot of things that we still need to see first. You know, yes, you spent money in the portal. Yes, it's another year of Blake Baker's defensive system. Garrett Nussmeier is really this outcome-changing, capable quarterback. The schedule is somewhat manageable, but 3 starters on the offensive line, like I said. The secondary, you know, they made additions, but you used to be DBU, and it just hasn't been that under Brian Kelly. It's actually been one of your weaker positional spots. Nuss needs to cut back on the turnovers. Can you actually run the football? I just feel like there's so many things that you need to wait to see before we're saying like, oh, yep, this is it. LSU did all these things in the offseason, and now they're in the playoffs. I need to watch a few games. And where it gets tough for them, just like it does with Hugh Freeze playing Baylor, week 1 against Clemson, everyone knows Brian Kelly is 0-3 in season openers with the LSU Tigers. A win is great for him. And even a close loss, I'll be like, hey, I think very highly of Clemson. A close loss, you know, I'll take it because I do think Clemson is one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the nation. But say that LSU goes out and they lose to Clemson the same way Clemson lost to Georgia in week 1 of last season. And they just get the doors blown off them. Clemson's defense is breathing down the LSU offensive line. And they can't run the football. And Nuss has 2 picks. And defensively, they can't stop Cade Klubnik. Now, last year, Clemson turned things around. And they won the ACC. And it was like this thing where you're like, okay, not too big of a result. But Dabo has a decade of consistently winning at Clemson to back up a bad loss. Brian Kelly can't afford that and then go into an SEC schedule. I'll start to hit the panic button a little bit if it's this big blowout. Could it be a great season? Totally. They've got a ton of talented players. They're one of the premier programs in the nation. I kind of have to see it because I haven't seen it yet from them. All right, and then the last coach we're going to talk about before we get to our third and final storyline that is going to shape the college football season is Brent Venables. Brent Venables is in a weird predicament because he's got a little bit of that Brian Kelly where he does have a 10-3 season at Oklahoma. He did beat Texas one season, but that was also back when they were in the Big 12. The SEC results thus far have been bleh, is the best way to describe it. And Oklahoma isn't one of those programs that will put up with 3 losing seasons in your first 4 years. I think he went 6-7, 10-3, 6-7. Another losing season, I think Oklahoma will be like, all right, this isn't it. That being said, there are a lot of reasons to buy into Oklahoma this upcoming season. Now, just as I said with LSU, you have to see these certain things, but the quarterback offensive coordinator duo from Washington State in John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle supposedly is one of those things that not Oklahoma lucked into, but it could be a momentum-changing addition here. And Mateer is a very talented quarterback. I'm more looking at Ben Arbuckle, who I think might be one of those guys where in a few years he's a head coach of a program, and he's like that Lincoln Riley when Lincoln Riley was Lincoln Riley. One of those guys where you're like, what is this guy doing as a play caller? He's a genius. He might be a few years ahead of everybody. I like John Mateer. I think Ben Arbuckle is the real key addition to this program. Jaden Ott was fantastic at Cal. He'll slide in here and be a really good running back for the Sooners. Deion Burks, wide receiver, got banged up last year, only played 5 games. He should be one of the better wide receivers in the conference. They have a experienced, strong offensive line. Venables is back calling plays for the defense. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive of a football team this upcoming year. There are reasons why I could take a look at Oklahoma, just like I said with LSU, and be like, hey, they could be a lot better. The difference between the two, I guess to keep tying them back in with each other, Brian Kelly needs to make the playoffs. He needs to be in contention for an SEC title. Oklahoma right now, I think if you could get an 8-5 season, or if you could get to 9 wins, that's going to keep Brent Venables in the head coaching spot. Stop me if you've heard me say this before a few times in this show. The schedule in the SEC is tricky. 7-game stretch to close the regular season. They have Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Mizzou, and LSU. Those are all teams that should be in the top half of the conference. 5 of those teams were either in or one of the first teams out of the playoffs last year. And you also open SEC play with Auburn, who we just talked about, and they also host Michigan in the second week of the season. Oklahoma could be one of the best 12 to 15 teams in the nation and still be like a 500 football team, just with the way the schedule lines up. I'd hope that an 8-5 season can keep Venables here for another year. I think he's one of the best defensive play callers in the nation. But anything worse than that, another 6-7 season, I could see them starting to push him out the door and look for greener pastures. And that leads me to my third and final storyline that will shape the college football season, and it was something that shaped last football's college season. Is there a 2025 version of Indiana football that will absolutely tear up the playoff picture, throw the biggest curveball possible, and have us talking for a month? Oh, did they deserve to get in? Did they deserve to be left out? Is there a team that will make us think in the way that Indiana made us think last year? I'm going to try and run through them quickly. I've got 5 of those teams for you. The first one, and the reason I wanted to talk about this conversation here, my team for this upcoming season is the Washington Huskies. Second year under Jedd Fisch. In the Big Ten, I believe they have the best quarterback, running back, receiver trio in Damon Williams Jr. at quarterback, Jonah Williams the running back, and Denzel Boston the wide receiver. All 3 of them, as we head toward the NFL draft, are some of the best prospects at their respective positions. Really fun offense. Jedd Fisch, one of the best offensive minds in this sport. They bring in Purdue's former head coach, Ryan Walters, to run the defense. He's had a few really good stops as a defensive coordinator. Mizzou, Illinois, when Illinois was like the best defense in the nation. Didn't go well at Purdue. Does anything go well at Purdue? I'll just say I think he's going to be great as a defensive coordinator. They portaled heavy on the defense. They bring in Takario Davis, star cornerback from Arizona, reunites with Jedd Fisch. Added 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers that are expected to start as well. Schedule in the Big Ten, just like the SEC, it's not easy, but it's not unbearable for the Huskies. They play Oregon, Ohio State, and Illinois. All 3 of them are at home. That environment is one of the better ones and kind of the more underrated home environments in the nation. I could easily see them beating in Oregon. I could definitely see them beating in Illinois. They do have one tough road trip in Michigan in mid-October. Washington, to me, if you can get through the season and you're a 2-loss team and the 2 losses are to Oregon or Ohio State, or maybe you're a 10-2 team that lost to Michigan on the road but beat Oregon at home, you're a playoff team. And I think it's one of those that I'm starting to see a few people talk about Washington. More people should be, because I think they're a top 4 to 5 team in the Big Ten, and 1 or 2 outcomes go their way, they could definitely be in the college football playoffs in that Indiana-type spot. Okay, go with a ride with me here for number 2. We're going to talk North Carolina football. So North Carolina returns 6 starters from this past season and just 2 on defense. That being said, this is one of the few situations where that might be a good thing. That same defense let JMU put up 70 points on him. Go Dukes. Total rehaul. Total restructure of the program. The GOAT is in running the ship, Bill Belichick. His son's running the defense. Freddie Kitchens, of all people, running the offense. A lot of weird characters in this facility. A lot of new players. The reason North Carolina could find themselves in this position, Bill Belichick, in his history in the NFL, has always been the best coach at not losing the game. Or I guess making the other team lose the game for themselves. He might not be, well, that's not to say he's not the greatest winner. He does his job. And he strictly, sorry, let me try this again. He's one of the best in the business at not losing games. He won't have the flashy offense that is hanging 50 on teams this upcoming season. But his players will be keyed in on doing their job, as he's always preached. And that will cause a lot of teams at the collegiate level to lose the games for themselves, where they're going to be sound, they're going to be smart, and they're going to let the other teams who have, young kids we're all talking about. They're 18, 19, 20, 21. Some of them are a little bit older, but they're going to do a really good job at allowing the opponents to lose the game for themselves. Now, the schedule is where you really can make your money. 6 of their 8 ACC conference games are against bottom 7 projected teams in the conference. They've got to play Clemson in early October, and they've got Duke in late November. Second year for Manny Diaz there. They're going to be a good team, but I think they're still beatable. They're not going to win every game. They do have TCU to start the season. TCU is one of those teams considered to be in the mix for the Big 12 title. Say they lose that one. Say they, lose to Clemson, obviously. Maybe lose one other ACC game in that schedule. A 3-loss North Carolina team or a 2-loss North Carolina team with the way their schedule played out, they're going to be in that mix late in the season, and that's what we're talking about here. Team number 3, we're going to go to the Big 12, and we're going to talk about Texas Tech, one of the more intriguing litmus tests in college football this season. Can money buy you a spot in the college football playoffs? We're about to find out. The Red Raiders have put up $55 million into their roster for this upcoming season. 22 transfers, 11 potential starters. The entire defensive line is new, 3 new offensive linemen, RB1, wide receiver 1, brought in to help elevate what is a good but not great team. Now, they did keep their solid players on the roster. Senior quarterback Baron Morton threw for 3,000 yards last year, 25 scores. Jacob Rodriguez was the leading tackler in the Big 12. Preseason Defensive Player of the Year for the conference. They're both back. So they keep their best players, and they're like, hey, let's put it all in. They're an 8-5 team last season. This is not like a university putting a Band-Aid of $55 million on a 2-10 roster. They were a good football team. Now they're trying to be great. I'm really excited to see it this year because you don't really get too many variations of people just buying a football program and seeing how it works. Florida State tried it. They got 2 different results one year after the other. This, to me, is like the real true test here because Texas Tech isn't at the same caliber of a Florida State program-wise historically. If they can put all that money in and it gets them to a Big 12 championship, I mean, hats off for them going all in on a year where they really realized they could seize the opportunity. Team number 4, we're going to move to Nebraska. I don't know if you can still hear it, but there's an echo that's been ringing around since last college football season ended, and it's Matt Rule, year 3. I mean, I hear that every day. Every time I listen to a Big 10 preview or a Nebraska preview or reading an article, it's Matt Rule, Big 3. And it's reasonable. Double-digit win seasons in his 3rd year with both Temple and Baylor. Is doing that in the American and the old Big 12 a little bit easier than the Big 10? We'll find out. That being said, there's a ton that plays into Nebraska's favor this year. They avoid Ohio State and Oregon on the schedule. Their games against Michigan and USC are at home. And then after that, it's a lot of teams that I would say I don't expect much out of. Maryland, Minnesota, Northwestern, UCLA, Michigan State, and the non-conference against Akron and Houston Christian. The offensive system, Dana Holgorsen came in at the end of the year, put up 3 20-plus point performance for his offense there. Is that great in today's college football? No, but it's better than where they were. You're getting a 2nd year out of Dylan Raiola. If he grows into the player that we expect him to be, then yeah, this team should make a massive jump. And then you're talking about a guy who at the end of the season is in the mix for the college football playoffs. So I've given you my team, Washington. I've given you the crazy hypothetical of North Carolina. Texas Tech, everybody talks about. Same with Nebraska. The last one I've got for you, and the way we'll end this show, a team that could be a 2025 version of Indiana is Indiana. Indiana is a better football team right now than they were in 2024. And while their schedule is definitely more difficult than a year ago, Groundhog Day could be upon us here as we get late in the season. They're certainly, I am certain they are better at the quarterback position. And that's not to say they were bad with Curtis Rourke. He was fantastic. Fernando Mendoza of Cal is going to make a massive leap in this offensive system and with the playmakers around him. I think he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in that entire conference. They returned 3 starters on the offensive lines. Elijah Surratt, go Dukes, still there as the number 1 wideout. Defensively, Mikal Kamara up front, go Dukes. Aiden Fisher in the middle, go Dukes. D'Angelo Pons in the back end, go Dukes. They still got their star players at every level of the defense. Decent continuity at the offensive line, and a really great wide receiver there in Elijah Surratt. This year on the schedule, they swap out Ohio State and Michigan for Penn State and Oregon. They get both of them on the road. For sure, 2 very losable games I would expect them to lose. But they still play 5 teams that were placed in the bottom 8 of the Big Ten preseason poll. So you got 5 pretty easy games there, teams I would expect them to beat. Say they handle those teams and go 0-2 to Penn State and Oregon on the road. That means their season comes down to facing Illinois and Iowa in consecutive weeks. Say they win those 2 games, and they're 10-2 on the season, and their losses are to Penn State and Oregon on the road. You're not leaving Indiana out of the college football playoffs. You're just not. If you kept them in last year with the schedule they had, and then all they do this year is lose to Oregon and Penn State, maybe one's a close loss. If they get blown out both times, people will hang on to that as an argument. A 10-2 team in the Big Ten that loses to Penn State and Oregon on the road, you're keeping them in. And if you don't, you're going to be hearing from Curt Cignetti every day until the day he dies. He's going to be that mad about it. So those are my 3 biggest storylines for the college football season. Star quarterbacks ready to take their teams to title contention. The head coaches that are on the hot seat, well, they shit, get off the pot. And then the 5 sleeper teams to be kind of that Indiana storyline that we had last season. We're just about an hour of this show. I want to thank you all again for listening and supporting. Again, if you are on Spotify or Apple, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it. Reach out to me if you're a friend. Let me know what you thought of it. Let me know if any improvements you think I could make. If you're on the YouTube channel, like, subscribe. I really want to grow something on there as well, too. It seems to be something where you can gain a lot of traction. Thank you. We will be back on Wednesday. I think I said that at the beginning of the show. We're a thrice-weekly show. We're going to get into some other overarching storylines. We're going to start conference previews and predictions the following week. And man, dude, we're just a few weeks away from the college football season. I am fired up. Thank you guys for listening, watching the first episode of the SpringBlake College Football Show. We'll see you in a few days. Peace.